Hello and welcome to Runkle of the Bailey. And we've got Rob Lawn Lumber here. Guys, I guess we'll just introduce this by noting that we're going to be talking about a really difficult topic today. And this is there's a lot of sort of emotional issues that come up with this, and a lot of people have very personal experiences that can make this difficult to talk about and difficult to listen to as well. I'm also going to just sort of acknowledge we got two guys here on the stream, so we're going to be doing our best with some of those issues. Both of us, from sort of different angles of things, have dealt with domestic violence cases. I do it in terms of criminal defense aspects, and Rob does the family law aspect, and both of those are engaged. You know, a lot of these files end up with lawyers on those separate aspects of things. I should also note, because we both sort of have our different experiences here and so forth, we're going to, interrupt each other and so forth. We are great friends. Please don't. And, sometimes the chat is like, hey, let him talk or whatever. No, we're good. We got this. So we're all, when we venture into sort of some difficult things, I've got a content warning that I'll throw up. If that, if this is something that's going to sort of affect you personally, that might be a time to just, hit the mute button. We'll have a content warning end sort of video, and you'll see those sort of as they come up, but that'll be your cue to sort of switch the mute button off again. So, I guess we'll kind of dive right in.
Well, before we dive in, Ian, why don't you give some of your background? Because I know people trickle in for the first like 5-10 minutes. So give some of your background and why this case in particular kind of caught your interest.
So I do criminal defense work, and and so when I saw this video, there was a lot that's sort of familiar there. And one thing about criminal defense work is that people always assume that because you're defending the person who's charged, that necessarily means that you're defending the abuser. And I will say much of the time that happens, but you also end up defending people who have been wrongly accused, and that is a thing. But the police also don't always get it right. So sometimes the people I'm defending are the clear victims of, things. When all the sort of dust settles out, sometimes it turns out that the police charged the wrong person. I wish that wasn't the case, but it absolutely happens. And there's all sorts of fallout from that, because when I do criminal defense aspects, usually I'm wanting to touch base with the family lawyers, because, for instance, especially if somebody's been charged wrongly, this can also affect them in terms of the family law dimensions as well. There's also connections to sort of video gaming stuff, which, is an interest for me, as well as sex work stuff. And I've brought on people before to talk about some of the legal implications there. And that's engaged here as well, because there is some, that becomes part of the dimensions of this. So this is a really complicated one, and complicated matters don't necessarily have easy answers, notwithstanding the fact that generally people prefer those. So that's kind of what, I saw that one, and I wasn't originally planning to do a video on it. And then I watched some of the video clips and went, yeah, because really what I want to talk about in part is how difficult it can be for people to escape these sorts of relationships, and the psychological and practical barriers that can come up, and how people can try to break out of that and sort of do what they have to do if that's sort of the circumstances there. So, and I guess now it's sort of your turn to sort of explain. I know part of it is that I sort of reached out, but sort of give people some background here.
Well, yeah, when you reached out, I had no clue what this case was about. But for those of you who know, or for those of you watching after who don't know who I am, I'm a domestic relations family lawyer that's been litigating cases for more than 10 years. involved his family, polyamorous relationships.
Oh no. Hopefully that it looks like he might be having some net troubles. I hope it's
Oh
not
no, am
on
I
my
having
end.
internet problems? Okay. No, it's probably on my end. Sorry, but yeah. So I've been handling family law cases for more than 10 years. So when I saw a case like this involving allegations of this nature, it kind of triggered the litigator in me, and I was kind of trying to figure out, well, I wanted to give some context, and I wanted to try to give a little bit of input on this particular case because I've represented people on both sides of this aisle. And this is a really tough subject. And I think it's important that the people that are discussing it have some background in this material. So when Runkle asked me to do it, I went on a deep dive to try and figure out what was going on. And here we are. So hopefully we'll be able to handle this discussion.
Yeah, and I'm just going to note I'm probably not going to play the video in part because it's difficult to watch, and partially also I suspect that there's probably going to be a round of copyright strikes that goes out over that. This is already going to be a difficult topic, and I fully expect that I will see YouTube turn around and punish this video basically and hit it with either a demonetization or I may catch a strike. So if you guys don't see me for a week, I might have caught a strike. But I also don't want to sort of fish for one, if that makes sense. But
Yeah, which is
and
inherently frustrating in itself because you're thinking that who better to actually have a discussion about this than two attorneys that practice in this area and try to bring some calm and reality to the situation. But hey, YouTube is YouTube.
yeah, and I'm just sort of laying that out there. But also, a lot of it is going to be difficult to watch, and I kind of feel that watching somebody in anguish might not be the best thing. And I have a copy of like the full stream. I've watched through it repeatedly. Um, I see Hogue is noting that his was demonetized right off the bat. Um, I understand has taken that stream down, and I kind of want to have some regard for that because she may have had reasons for it. It might be, on the advice of counsel. Might be on the advice. It might just be personally traumatic for her, or it might be that she is facing difficult situations, and I don't really know what to say, on that, other than just that we're trying to approach this in a respectful fashion that causes no damage or as little damage to people as we possibly can. So that's kind of sort of why I'm shying away from this. But I guess we should talk a little bit about the allegations there and what is on the video, just to give people some context. So she was on a stream, and I couldn't tell for certain. I've seen reports either way as to whether or not the her phone rang and she answered it, or she called out, and I couldn't really tell for certain one way or the other. But regardless, she is on a call with her husband. And for a lot of people, this was a surprise because they were surprised to find out that she has a husband. I'll probably address that a little bit when we get to the discussion of how the sex work aspects play into this. But she was, he was shouting and abusive on this phone call. She was crying. But it's difficult to say what exactly is going on behind the scenes. He does acknowledge threats to her animals, and she sort of claims that. And there's other sort of issues going on in terms of financial control in this, that she basically suggests that he has control of the accounts, that he is fighting all of that. So it's a difficult thing, and it's hard to listen to. Hearing somebody berating somebody like that is always very difficult to listen to. And yeah, is there anything you wanted to add sort of on that one?
My first observation of this was, and this is kind of a caution to everyone watching this, you guys are watching, this is for both parties, you're watching one conversation that takes place over the course of a marriage that is, by nature of this conversation and by how this conversation illustrated, already remarkably tumultuous and toxic. So you're getting a snapshot of a relationship where both of these individuals are not perhaps engaging in their best version of themselves, and that's not an excuse for their conduct at all. And I'm talking about a lot of yelling, a lot of discussions. Yeah, it's a snapshot. You're getting a glimmer, or you're getting a look at one conversation that takes place, and you're getting the perspective of the viewer of a Twitch stream from the outside in.
Yeah. It's the one thing that is really difficult about these situations as well is that people have this idea of how abuse looks. And often that idea is that it's sort of one person who is that everything is sort of pure and everyone is perfect versus like an absolute monster. And that does happen. But there's often, and this causes a lot of problems for abuse victims in the sense that if they're imperfect or if they are reacting or this kind of thing, it can cause them a lot of difficulty there. I see.
Let's stray away from the word imperfect. There is no such thing as a perfect person or a perfect abuse
Yeah,
victim. That every person in a family, in a relationship dynamic, there is no perfect, there is no imperfect, there is just people. These are two people. At the end of the day, these are two
yeah,
humans. So by very design, the fact that they are human, they are both fundamentally imperfect. There is no such thing as a perfect victim right off the bat.
yeah. So, and I mention this because I have seen people say, "Oh, she did this or she did that," to blame her, or you can't necessarily draw any of these. You know, you can't necessarily draw any sort of conclusions on that kind of thing. But like the the issues with like the animals and so forth is clearly you know in Canada at least. I don't know about where she is. In here, that would be a crime. That would be a criminal offense to threaten somebody's animals, and often you would expect jail time where somebody does that in the context of a domestic relationship. I don't know about where she is. And I don't think she knows. She sort of states that in the stream. I see somebody saying, please introduce Amouranth in a few words. Some people in chat don't know who she is. Um, so, and I see that she's in Texas. I don't know Texas domestic law intimately. So, in terms of who she is, she streams on Twitch. And from what I understand, she makes about 2 million a month, which is, I would be happy to make in like 10 years what she makes in a month. So she makes a lot of money, but it sounds like there's connections about, with how like her husband is involved in this to some degree in terms of planning and so forth. It's not entirely clear. But she does OnlyFans work. I haven't seen her OnlyFans. And so I don't know what sort of content is on there. I know that on Twitch, she's sort of noted for doing like hot tub streaming and so forth. And so this has got a lot of people sort of noting things. And she also hadn't admitted to being married until this weekend. Up until now, she had sort of indicated that she was single, which has a lot of people also upset for other reasons that we'll sort of get to here. And I see, if memory serves, she made hot tub streams famous and forced Twitch to actually create a hot tub tab.
Yeah.
So,
So, I mean, without getting like just too like bullet point list, she's a streamer that has multiple platforms on which she streams, some of which are gaming related, some of which are more influencer related, some of which are adult related. She has multiple content avenues. This was for lack of a better term, it was a venture. It was a business opportunity that was pursued. And she obviously was very successful at pursuing that. But yeah, there are multiple facets to this. She was very, very popular, is very, very popular on all of those aspects of this venture.
Yeah, and so she's tremendously popular. She has a lot of income, but I guess sort of in terms of, and I see Hogue is noting that she's a marketing / ad / SEO genius. We can't undersell that. Apparently, her husband was involved in that as well, and this gets into the business aspect, because when you start having a divorce, the what you end up with is that all of these business ventures start to get divided up, and dividing up her kind of business venture is going to be a bit of a challenge, because you can't really have Amouranth split up into anything. She's the face of it. So it's a challenge here.
There is an observation in the chat that I think is a relatively good, jumping off point. When you interplay, and when you have the interplay of marital relationship, content creation, finances being derived from the benefit, or for the benefit of the marriage, from a business venture in which both participants are active, or at least in some form engaged and have opinions, and then you have your own independent lifestyle, that interplay of things is immediately, I mean, you are intersecting multiple avenues that are already rife with conflict, and now you're putting them into one setting, which is just a very tenuous situation, very tough situation to navigate, period.
Yeah. And one thing I've been seeing a lot of people saying is, why doesn't she just leave? She's got all this money. And, so we can sort of talk about kind of the architecture of how control happens. And I mean, she's kind of a prominent example here, because there's so much money involved. But these issues apply all the way down the line. Like, they apply to millionaires. They apply to, I've seen it apply to like lawyer divorces, where they're not $2 million a month, but maybe each of them is earning 150,000, and it still becomes an issue. I see it apply to people who are living in a trailer, and people who are really struggling. So these are issues that apply all the way up and down. And so one thing we see, and this is mentioned in the chat by a few people, one of the allegations, and we don't know for sure what's going on here. There's a whole lot of, we've heard one statement, and it's a weird sort of thing. We've got a snapshot. Ultimately, a lot of this is going to get broken down, and I don't really want to sort of dive into things in terms of making any sort of specific factual conclusions, because we don't know. But we know what the allegations are, and that's sort of useful to discuss things here. But certainly there can be issues of financial control, and where you've got one partner who holds all of the money. And I've seen that with like lawyers and doctors. I've dealt with doctors who have been making far more than I do, each of them. And yet they're going, I don't have any money to get out. And I'm sure you've sort of seen that same sort of thing with the like financial control aspects.
There's an interplay here. Every single relationship, whether it's business related, especially in the context of marriages, there's a dynamic, there's a power dynamic that exists. People say that there's type A and type B, and that's, when you boil things down, there's type A and type B, but there's a categorical approach to that, right? Think of your own relationships. There's people that take the lead on certain aspects of your relationship. And then there's people that take the lead on other aspects of the relationship. It's not uncommon for marriages to have one person that's primarily responsible for paying the bills and the other person that's primarily responsible for doing other things in the household. This is not uncommon. It doesn't matter whether it's the guy, girl, whomever does it. There is a power dynamic that exists in every single marriage. And when one person's power becomes either they are made to feel that power is a lesser contributor to the marriage, the other person in a toxic marriage or in a toxic relationship can try to exert influence over their power sphere. And you see this in custody battles when they play out. This is probably a good example. In cases where you have a mom that has stayed at home and raised the children, when these two split, there is a power dynamic that exists where the custody raising the children has been primarily done by one of the participants to the marriage. It doesn't mean that the other party to the marriage is a lesser father, for example. It just means that the power dynamic that existed at that point in time was imbalanced. And you will see parents in custody battles try to exert that power in a less than tasteful manner, where one parent basically uses the kids against the other parent. And that plays out in every category when you talk about a marriage. Financial decisions, where we're going to live, what we're going to do, whether one person's working or both people are working, the type of work they're doing, the role the family has, where the family travels, how they spend their money. Power dynamics exist in every facet of a marriage. And when you have a marriage that's breaking down, you have one party to the marriage that will try to use that power to exert influence over the other party to try and either keep them in or push them away. And it's a dumbed down version, but it's a way that people need to understand that marriages aren't just one back and forth. There's several different exchanges that take place on a daily basis.
Yeah, and the degree of these kinds of controls is can vary. I mean, I've seen situations with with people who are in such financial control that I've had to like advise people on how to sneak money out of a relationship to hire divorce counsel, for instance. Because if you're going to a family lawyer, they're like, well, we want most family lawyers charge for a consultation, and there's various reasons for that, because it prevents certain abuses and so forth. But like I've seen women have to do things and guys sometimes like go in and buy produce and then return some of it so that they end up with with some money there, and like figuring out which stores will allow a return without amending the original receipt, because some people control things down to like here is $200, go do the shopping, and then I expect to see the receipt and the exact amount of change back when you get here. This is it can get really serious. And I see the charge for a consultation to avoid conflict of interest carpet bombing.
Yep.
That's exactly.
I think I've even talked to you about that, where people will go and they will give deposits to every good divorce attorney in the area to try and conflict them out. So in Northern Virginia, you'll have people that'll go and give $5,000 to every high-powered divorce attorney in the area to try and make sure there's a conflict of interest so that the other spouse has to go outside of that. That also plays out in court differently than people think it does, because judges do view that. And I have argued cases where it's like he paid $5,000 to every other person, so that's $50,000. So he paid that amount of money, so she should get that amount of money out of the marriage to go hire her own attorney, and that allows her to go outside of that network to find other people as well. This is a lot of pre-judicial process, and honestly, this is a tough one to discuss because, like I said, we're seeing one side of it, but so many people are talking about it right now that it's almost impossible not to try to give a little bit of context.
I have seen I've seen similar things where here in Alberta, one of the remedies that the court has imposed for that kind of behavior is just, okay, you're going to pay for a lawyer, and you're also going to pay for a lawyer potentially from like another town, including all of that lawyer's travel expenses. Which, you know, if you're thinking of if you're thinking of like Edmonton, Calgary is 3 hours drive. And so if you're thinking of paying a lawyer's time to drive 3 hours back and forth for all of these applications, um, that adds up. So it's not a good strategy, but people do try it. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of the, family lawyers don't do, free consultations. But that can make it very difficult for somebody whose money is currently tied up by somebody else to escape. And that's something that happens at all financial levels. That can happen in situations where you've got like one party is working and the other one doesn't, and therefore exerts absolute control over the money. But it can also happen, like, as I mentioned, doctors, where like the paycheck comes in and immediately goes into an account that the other person has no control over. And that's a means of this control that what Rob was talking about, where you just, maybe you don't have control over that other person, because if it's a relationship between two doctors, you're talking about people who have a lot of options, a lot of, flexibility. And often, and I can't say always, but often that controlling aspect comes from the person in the relationship who feels more threatened, and that they feel like they're on weaker ground. So
Let me caveat that.
yeah,
I mentioned the power dynamic that exists in relationships, and this is an important lens to view this through. Control exists, which means that there is a person with greater control and lesser control in every different aspect of a marriage. In regard to, like I said, the kids, or in household management, there's a person who has lesser control who's trying, when the marriage starts breaking down, to gain control over this part. Well, how do they do that if this is already established? They make the decision in error to try and use an area where they have greater control to try and force, I hate the word compliance, but to force the other person to try and see their side. And the problem with that is, I call it the shock and awe approach. You try to do something so egregious in the one area of the marriage or relationship that you have power over, something so egregious that you try to shock the conscience of the other person. The problem is, by the time that you get to that point, there's been so much gaslighting that's taken place that there's no, what you're doing is not bringing that other person to your point of view. Rick uses the whole reasonable minds can differ. At this point in time in the conversation in these marriages, there are no more reasonable minds. They're not reasonable. They're exerting influence and trying to control a situation that's already spiraling out of control.
Yeah. And I see people in the chat saying, we don't know what's going on here and so forth. We don't.
Correct.
We're not making any factual conclusions here. We're talking about allegations, and really, this is a springboard to talk about some of the larger issues. Because I know there's a lot of people out there who have either suffered through this, and some of them may be suffering through it right now. And other people may unfortunately suffer through it in future. And so I think it's useful to have these discussions just to sort of consider what can be done.
Here's why it's useful. Let's say that you're in a marriage, or you know someone that's in a marriage or a relationship where they are starting to exhibit signs of things that I'm talking about, or Ian is talking about. They're not all the way to this point, but they're starting to exhibit those signs. You can then have additional context to see, based on what we're describing here, where this could possibly be going. So many people come to my office, and they come to my office after they have been in a relationship that should have ended 2 years ago. And the decisions that are made in the 2 years that are prior to that have taken several years off of their life. And they oftentimes will come to me and they say, I wish I would have talked to you 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And what I think the only thing that we can kind of do at this point with this situation is to kind of use some of the things that are taking place to allow people to use them as signals to say, hey, maybe I should talk to somebody. Maybe this is a big enough thing. Maybe I shouldn't just dismiss this and say things are going to change. To actually have conversations that should be had back when these problems start arising, whether that's with a therapist, a counselor, an attorney, before 2 years fast forward and you're at this type of situation.
Yeah. And this is the other thing, is that not escaping can actually in some situations worsen your position. And part of the reason why is that in some cases there's a very clear sort of victimization pattern that happens, and then in order to regain some control, they engage in behavior that might be sort of seen as bad behavior by a court or by the public. And so that becomes a situation where in some situations people get their situation gets undermined by all of this. And that's sort of a problematic situation. Like I've seen in particular, women who are like, listen, I've been being abused for 3 years. The first time I throw a punch back, now I'm getting charged. And that becomes a very difficult scenario, right? It's and those people are typically like, I wish I'd gotten out sooner, but it's hard. There's psychological traps, there's emotional traps, there's financial traps, there's all of these aspects that and typically the abusive pattern involves cutting off people's resources. It involves sort of shrinking people's range of options. So it's difficult there. So I guess in terms of the allegations, like, we don't know the degree, if any, to which there was physical abuse. There's some comments that suggest physical. There's some comments that suggest not. I can't say one thing or another there. The animal aspect seems to be fairly clear, in the sense that there's text messages and so forth on that. I see somebody saying, so if anyone here ever finds themselves in a similar situation, do not tell the bank or broker that you're divorcing. It's a bad magic word because they can't release funds from a joint account once they know.
Let's not. I've seen people say that. Each person's situation is very unique. And banks are very unique in what they can do based on the titling of the account. It's a state-specific thing, actually.
Yeah. I was going to say, this seems like the kind of thing that would be jurisdiction specific. And also the most important person to talk to about these things in these situations is a lawyer. And if you're in a situation of this kind of toxic relationship that is disintegrating, talk to a lawyer sooner rather than later, because ultimately the lawyer can help you out with making sure you've got resources and making sure you've got options, and that you don't do anything inadvertently that can harm you.
Well, we can't help the inadvertence. The inadvertence just happens sometimes against our best advice. But you are 100% right. 100% right. And whether that's a criminal defense attorney, talk to a family lawyer early on, please.
Talk to the
As
a criminal defense lawyer, if you have the money to talk to the family lawyer first, and the family lawyer can tell you, first of all, who they recommend, because most family lawyers have worked with criminal defense lawyers and have a list of people that they think are worth talking to and people who they think aren't. The other thing is that the family lawyer can tell you if they think you need a criminal defense lawyer.
Mhm.
The only situation where I would say that inverts is if you are currently in like police custody or facing, or the police are trying to talk to you, then talk to the criminal defense lawyer first. But hopefully you're in a situation where the family lawyer is the first person to speak to. So I guess I kind of want to talk about sort of methods to get money out if you have no conclusion or no options on that. And I will say, ideally, you'd be in a situation where you talk to the family lawyer before you look at money at all, because some jurisdictions and different jurisdictions handle this differently. Like if you go in and close all the joint accounts, some jurisdictions will say, "Oh, that's just prudent," and some jurisdictions will say, "Oh, that's abusive behavior." And you want to know where you are on that scale before you do anything, because some of them will take things very seriously if you mess with any of that money. So that is kind of a thing to consider. I don't know if that's sort of a topic you want to venture into here, or if that's sort of a
The financial element.
yeah.
Here's a good one. Pull up Georgina's super chat right there. That's a good one to pull up. Good. How do you make sure your lawyer doesn't let the spouse know what you're doing? They can't. We have a absolute right of confidentiality. When Ian's going through the situation of talk to a family lawyer, the saddest part about listening to that audio is that it didn't shock me. Like it didn't. I have heard
Yeah.
worse. I have heard far worse. I have heard and seen audio and video of things you could not possibly imagine. And I hope you never ever have to come across, involving relationships that involve sex work, or that relationships that involve polyamorous relationships. I have seen it all. And the number of clients whose information I've divulged, zero. And I never will, because it is confidential. That is important to the attorney. You talk to an attorney because the attorney is precluded from divulging that information. And here's the thing: if you talk to an attorney who's been practicing domestic relations litigation for long enough, whatever you think is going to shock them, I am telling you, they have seen it before. There is very little that you will say that will surprise them. And I don't care how bad the evidence looks against you, that you think looks against you. They are there to listen, and they're there to provide guidance. Ian, and this is a good place where he can chime in. When you have someone who's come to you who's done something that's horribly wrong, it doesn't matter. You still have to tell them how to navigate their situation, because that little bit of advice can keep them from getting themselves in more trouble, doing more stupid things, or ending themselves in a pot of hot water they don't belong in, or they shouldn't be in, because you have intervened at a certain stage where the thing that they did was wrong, was early enough in the process that they have found a way to navigate and correct their behavior going forward. Family law is the same way, especially when it comes to finances and dynamics that exist inside the household.
And I will add a couple of caveats here. One of them is one that came up in chat and is a very good response in chat. And that's here from Eileen. Don't tell your friends and family what you talk about with your attorney. Just
Correct.
don't. There's two reasons for this. One, your friends and family are compellable witnesses in most cases. And what that means is that they can be subpoenaed to tell the court what you said. And the other thing is that anything you tell other people, you can actually punch holes in the privilege to the point where you may not enjoy that protection. Your lawyer will still maintain confidentiality, which means your lawyer won't talk about it. But the distinction is, confidentiality is, I, as a lawyer, I don't talk about your business. Privilege goes a step further, which is, privilege is if I'm called into court and they say, your client must have said all of these things to you. I can basically say, probably, but you know what? What client? There is privilege. I'm not even going to acknowledge that you are a client. I have had people call up and say, so is so-and-so a client at your firm? And I just hang up the phone. That's true whether they're a client or not. because like even that detail is privileged.
And in some cases that can be true whether a judge tells you to or not.
Yep.
Because that privilege exists and it's so well founded that if a judge tells you, if a judge tells me to tell them, I tell the judge I need a specific factual finding that my client waived that privilege, and I cannot divulge it because unless you make that finding, I'm on the hook for saying this, not you, not the court. So it has to be the court that says I find that privilege has been waived, and I have my law partners on the stand on one particular case where her own client was being, after she had been discharged and relieved, it was a contentious situation. Her own client asked her to get up on the stand. And after every single question that her own client asked her, she had to ask the judge, I need a finding that my client has waived before I answer that question. And it was about an attorney's fees issue in a divorce case. And it was the client went Daryl Brooks pro se. Funny story, just bad.
Yeah. I at one point was in court asking to get off the record on the basis of a conflict of interest, and the judge asked, "What is the conflict?" And I just was sitting there saying to the judge, "That's privileged." The judge is saying, "No, I need to know what the conflict is." And I said, "Well, that's privileged." And they said, "Okay, well, I can hold you in contempt." And I said, "You certainly can, but it's still privileged." And that's as far as it went. Like sometimes you just, I had the judge literally threatening to throw me in jail as to whether I'd answer that question. And it was like, throw me in jail or don't, but I'm not answering because I didn't have a waiver of privilege and it was privileged. The judge actually later wrote me a letter saying I was wrong to ask that. You did good for standing up. But yeah, I think that they sent me that letter because they were probably planning on sending me a different letter when they started researching it. But and I see somebody asking a good question here. Are lawyers mandatory reporters in some circumstances, or does attorney-client privilege bypass that? There are some circumstances where we may have to make a report. Where I am, that circumstance is basically imminent threats to somebody else's physical safety. So, for instance, if a client says, I am headed to my ex's house right now to murder her, I may have to report that. But it has to be right now. And if I talk them out of it, that ends the reporting requirement. Like if they're like, hey, I'm not, I guess that would be a bad idea. It's like, okay, we're back in privilege town.
In my jurisdiction, you have to have actual knowledge that they are going to do the thing. Like the standard is remarkably high, which is why one of the first conversations I have with my clients is to make that very clear. While I am here to counsel you and give you every bit of my expertise, I am not a licensed psychotherapist. You need to talk to that therapist. You need to get a therapist if you don't have one. You need to talk to one. You need to start engaging with counselors, people with whom you have a protected privacy relationship, because these things do come up and lawyers are subject to different restrictions than others.
And the other caveat I'll give on the lawyer confidentiality aspect in a relationship is don't go to your real estate lawyer and don't go to any lawyer who has represented you on a shared interest. Because if you are both clients of that lawyer, then that lawyer has an obligation to both of you, and you have no confidentiality as to with each other, at least in my jurisdiction. So don't go to the person who helped you form a joint corporate venture. Don't go to the person who helped you together buy real estate. You need to go to a new lawyer that you have not done anything with the other partner with.
And I don't care if that lawyer tells you that they can assist you because it was an unrelated matter. Don't listen to them. There are such things as good and ethical attorneys, and there are such things as not good attorneys. There are cases, one of which is pending for trial right now, where an attorney was representing both parties where there was an inherent conflict of interest, and that should not have existed. And the fact that it continued for that long, there's no doubt that there was prejudice bestowed upon one of those parties. So go to a different attorney. It's not that hard. just please, I know I say it's not that hard. I'm not trying to minimize the difficulty of actually doing these things. It is more important than the difficulty of getting there is a cost to you.
Yeah, it's and I see we've got a question here. Thank you for the answer. Finding lawyers like the two of you might not be so easy. So you would suggest not a friend that you know is a lawyer. That friend may or may not be willing, but I mean, lawyer confidentiality applies even like if a friend of mine comes to me with an issue and it's with another friend of mine, what my response is probably going to be is like, listen, I can't take this file because I have a conflict because I know both of you and I'm friends with both of you.
You mean if I've had to block friends because they wouldn't stop talking about it? Like
But then
where a friend comes to me with like I'm going through a divorce. I want to talk to you about all this stuff. I said, I can't. I know both of you. I'm not doing it. And then I refer them out, and then they keep trying to communicate. And every communication they send to me is about it. I say no, and they say, okay, no problem. And they keep communicating. All of a sudden it comes back around full circle. And I've actually had to block them to basically say, look, I'm going to have to block you if you keep doing this.
I mean, I've had friends approach me with stuff like that, you know, for criminal files and it's just like, I can't talk to you about this. And just, I will never mention this to the other, to the other side of this. Like, it's just like, even though I can't take the file, there's still not going to be any discussion of this with the other party. And I see we've got the spam bots have shown up here. So I am going to throw on subscriber mode. Sorry to anyone who's not in the subscriber category, but hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. I just want to keep the sketchy bots out. So I see Rob's sort of AFK for a moment, so I'll go through some of the super chats here. Selena, thank you very much, and thank you for the note about. Thank you for discussing this. Right early, Donnie Jomo, sorry. Good evening. So good to see you guys. Thank you to the mods. Hart, thank you, Ian and Rob, for being true to yourselves. Be blessed, everyone. Well, thank you very much, and love the positive sentiments. Callista became a member. 9-Inch Nails Gal 1994. Thank you for the membership. Same with Kelly's Corner. 9-Inch Nail Gal 1994. I love that the two of you are able to talk about hard topics like this with a realistic view while remaining respectful. Survivor appreciating it. Thank you very much. I mean, there's a lot of people who've gone through a lot of difficult stuff on this. And, you know, we have to sort of navigate the difficult legal issues, which are often sort of complicated and so forth. But we also want to make sure that we're not harming anybody in our audience here. Are there also instances of the lines of communication being controlled by one party? Yep. I can tell you without sort of providing any details. I had somebody who committed a crime specifically for the purpose of being able to talk to a lawyer. And it was a way to do it. I don't recommend this method because the crime was itself bigger problems. But it did get them into a room alone with a lawyer. And I will tell you that the other partner was super pissed when they were like, hey, we're going to come in together. And I'm like, nope. I'm like, no, we do everything together. I get that, but go to the coffee shop. I'll see you in an hour. They were so upset. And it was the right, you know, I'm glad I did because otherwise I would never have found out what was actually happening on that file. So it happens. Ryan 432, thank you. No one is the villain of their own story. I'd guess anyone engaging in bad behavior has probably strongly rationalized their justification for it. Yep. And they may actually be justified sometimes.
Yeah. And even after the fact, even after the evidence is put in front of them, a lot of people can't. They'll never be able to actually comprehend it. The number of clients where I've had to kind of tell them what you did was wrong. Yeah. It's crazy.
I mean, I get that all the time where you've got like serious criminal acts and people are like, well, she cheated on me. It's like, dude, no, like that's not a justification. And sometimes people just can't see it. I'll talk a little bit about the mindset of abusers as well. just so that people can be aware of that as well, because sometimes it's scary. What if the abuser listed victim, spouse's partner in their biz without knowing, then won't give them access to cash, business or family accounts? That's where a family lawyer, or one of the places where a family lawyer can help out. And thank you, Irina Montano, and also CMS for the memberships, and Apple Pie. You're both willing to uphold your morals and responsibilities, even if there's a price to pay, and that's why we trust you with topics like this. Thank you. Thank you. I sort of say that ultimately you know somebody's morality when you know what the price they've paid for it is, what it's cost them. Because somebody who's moral and it only when it never costs them anything is only, they're only a good person so long as that's the way downhill is. So yeah. And somebody else was asking about, am I okay because of the health issues? I've been feeling fine. I don't know what the issue was ultimately. It may have just been like the world's worst case of food poisoning, but I am going to be seeing the doctor for some follow-ups and so forth. That didn't necessarily need to happen in the hospital. So yeah, it's difficult, but a lawyer, like, you shouldn't fear that your lawyer is going to turn around behind your back. A good lawyer, and I think most lawyers are good lawyers, at least in this sense, is not going to turn around and tell the other party what.
And ask around. Ask around. Ask a lawyer. You can ask a lawyer about the other lawyer that you met with. That's fine. I don't mind. I've had clients come into me and say, I met with this other attorney. I was like, great. I love that attorney. I think they're remarkably upstanding. If you have a good relationship with them, go with them. It's fantastic. Ask around. There are reputations, and they are earned for actual trial work and how people treat other attorneys or how attorneys handle discovery. Ask. You'll get answers. You'll be surprised.
And that's the thing, is I basically say, listen, you should talk to another, like, I get referrals from family lawyers, and but I tell people, like, talk to your family lawyer about me. I want your family lawyer to know that I exist and to know how to, reach me. And if your family lawyer says, I don't like this guy, fire him and get a different criminal defense lawyer, then do that. Like, your family lawyer family lawyers tend to know who the good criminal lawyers are, at least in these issues, and vice versa. Like, there's family lawyers that I won't refer clients to, and so forth. I see somebody asking, are online reviews reputable if you need to find a good attorney if referrals aren't working? No. Here's the thing. The only people who write referrals typically are people who are upset. And I actually turned reviews off because I had like 3 good reviews where I was like, client, don't put your information out there. Because I had clients who I was like, you had criminal charges. Do not put, like, I had one guy who it had his name attached to it, and he posted, he helped me beat these serious charges. And I was like, dude, you're innocent. Why are you putting your name out there with this charge that you mentioned? But I got a lot more reviews from people who weren't my clients. And
you think about it this way: the good family law attorneys are the family law attorneys that kind of have seen it all, and because of that, they've represented people on both sides of the aisle. And when it's family law. Who wants to go and write a review about their divorce? Realistically, who wants to go and write a review about a complicated custody battle? Online reviews don't work, but when you're in a group of friends and you see a friend going through it, how many of you will reach out to your friend and say, hey, talk to this person that helped me when I was down? Interpersonal connections is kind of how you find good attorneys. That is and I know that it's tough. But even having one friend in a group of friends that has been through a situation can help add context. So you can ask your friends if they have information and resources. And I'd prefer that you do that sooner rather than like holding it in and not talking just because you're afraid that you can't make that first step.
Yeah. And I can also tell you that there are review sites out there that have contacted me to say, hey, we've got reviews. If you want to have good reviews, you could start paying us. And so I don't pay them. And so they suppressed all the good reviews and they push up the down ones because some of those review sites are actively extortion rates. And I'm not going to name any names, but they exist. So review sites are difficult. It's tough to find a good lawyer. It is really hard to do in a lot of circumstances, in the sense of knowing for certain. But go meet with the lawyer, see how they do. And the other thing is, sometimes people are like, I really want an aggressive lawyer. And aggressive is not the way to go in most cases. You want somebody who can, who can sort of deal with things quietly and effectively. But there are some lawyers out there who are massively
A-holes.
who are, yeah. And family law bills by the hour. And so there are some lawyers out there who have an entire business model of preventing things from going smoothly because they will get paid more.
True, and I hate them. Well,
yeah,
I don't mean hate them. It's complicated. There are attorneys that have reputations, and that's why you actually need to start contacting and reaching out. There are 2 or 3 attorneys in this jurisdiction where when my client comes to me and they say the other side has hired this attorney, I tell my client quite literally, I am sorry to have to tell you this, but I know this attorney. Any amount that you thought you were going to have to spend on this divorce, you're going to have to quadruple it because this other attorney is going to make every single point an issue. And that's not a fun conversation, but I'm very upfront about that because there are attorneys that handle it that way. And I don't like dealing with them, but I'm happy when I get to, because I get to defend a client that I knew would otherwise not be able to get an attorney because of who was on the other side.
Yeah. But I see, are lawyers with TV commercials reputable? Lawyers with TV commercials have money to afford TV commercials. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're reputable. It just means that they have money. It is the nature of things. So see somebody saying lawyers with YouTube channels are even less reputable.
Sure.
I mean,
up to you, buddy. I mean, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I mean, you really won't. My clients will speak for themselves, and I'm happy with the work I've done. And yeah, sure.
My whole goal for the YouTube channel is that if I make enough money on the YouTube channel, I would like to set up my legal practice as purely pro bono. So that is my goal, is to turn this into my livelihood so that I can do the legal work entirely for free. So, and I see that the response is here. I was hoping for a chuckle. Okay, fair enough.
There's just so many dark. There's so many dark comments on. There's so many dark comments when we're talking about this particular case. Like it's hard. Sarcasm is hard to detect when you're talking about something that has Twitter in flames in either direction. So it's.
Yeah.
Sorry if
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and I see Emily is in the chat. Well, welcome. This is a tough one there, and I see the thing she was saying she agrees with is nothing in the world makes me more mad than opposing counsel running up the bill on BS. So frustrating, just working with businesses. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thankfully, it's not as big of an issue for criminal defense work. Especially because,
I mean, imagine Rick, imagine that when I'm dealing with a custody case.
Oh,
and
brutal.
people already know how I feel about things. The amount of cases where I have bills that I know my clients will never pay and I don't care just because the outcome was received or achieved. Lawyers aren't rolling in cash like you think. And the ones that are, they got there because well, I have opinions on it, but we don't have to go there.
I couldn't be the sort of lawyer who is rich, because I mean, unless, I guess, if I ever start making children opening boxes of toys money on YouTube, then maybe. But I did way too much I've done way too much pro bono or low bono work where like people are sitting there saying, hey, I need to, other lawyers are charging them like 20,000 and they're like, I live in a trailer, I have no money, and I end up doing their entire file for $200. You don't get rich doing that. But you get to look in the mirror and be happy with yourself. So that's kind of
that is so much freaking more rewarding. I cannot even tell you. Anyone in the legal practice, do what makes your heart feel good, and you'll just sleep better at night.
Yeah. So but we've kind of wandered afield here. The thing is that initially, at least, a lawyer is better than no lawyer. And there's nothing that says that you can't change lawyers later down the road. That is also an option. So, if you're in a situation where you're trying to get out, somebody can help you better than nobody. And especially if there's this financial control, because often even the worst lawyers, like the most self-interested lawyers, are really happy to help you get access to your money because they want access to your money.
We have temporary motions that are the first motions that get filed in a divorce case when you have disparate financial powers of the two parties. And I know several attorneys that will actually take cases up until that point. They won't take a single dollar, and they'll file a response and they'll file a motion to release funds from the marriage so that the funds get paid towards the attorneys. At least in Virginia, the way they view it is if someone is using marital funds to hire an attorney. So for example, if a husband is using access to a marital account, and when I say marital, people always say, well, it's not marital, blah, 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 it's my money. No, I'm speaking to Virginia law, but if you earned it during the course of the marriage, if that money was derived or earned by you in your employment, but it was earned in your employment during the course of the marriage, there is a presumption in Virginia that that is marital property, which means that in Virginia, I'm limiting this in Virginia, talk to a jurisdiction specific attorney, but if someone's using money that they earned during the marriage to go and pay for an attorney, every judge that I've been in front of basically says if you were able to access those funds to go get an attorney and the other spouse doesn't have access to those funds, we're giving them access to those funds to spend an equal amount on an attorney of their own. So there really is they do pretty good at trying to balance those scales.
Yeah, and I do want to note here, HE Engineers made it clear it was a joke. We just kind of react to that because there's so many people who come at us with like, oh, well, if you were really successful, you wouldn't be on YouTube. It's like, dude, you don't know me.
Well, it's nice. And it's nice that you have EDB pulled up right there. Yeah. Like Emily D. Baker right there as you're saying that. The really rich attorneys and the ones that have advertisements, Tom Girardi, Alex Murdaugh. I mean, talk to people in the area.
Yep. No, there's real issues with that, right? Because I had somebody who got upset with me because there was multiple co-accused on a file, and the co-accused, like their lawyers, pulled up in like a Mercedes and whatever else, and I pulled up in my 10-year-old Civic, and he's like, well, I mean, like they all got real nice cars. What does that mean if you're driving this old car? And I'm like, it means you're not paying for the nice car. And anyway, I did better than they did. I will just say that. My client didn't do jail time. Just saying. So yeah, yeah. So in terms of the financial aspects, as I've mentioned, sometimes people have had to go to fairly extreme motions. There are lawyers out there, and you may have to shop around. There are lawyers out there who might be willing to take on your file based on there is money in the marriage, but you can't access it yet. So there are lawyers out there who might be willing to take that on, just basically to step one, rescue the money, which I know sounds super cynical, but it is a thing there.
That's actually, I've never used that term. I think I might borrow that term, like rescue the money.
Yep. And so that exists, and you can look around. And when you're talking to a lawyer, it's perfectly acceptable to say, listen, I am a victim of abuse. And that can be hard for people to say, even when they have already come to that conclusion. It can be hard to tell somebody else that. That's one of those emotional blockages, is that people even have a hard time admitting it, because it can be humiliating, right? Especially if you've got somebody who's coming at things from a somebody who has prestige or something like that. When you've got somebody who's who feels that they should know better than to get into an abusive relationship, that can be tough. So in extreme circumstances, people have had to do things to sort of sneak money out of the relationship. Sometimes that comes down to things like taking the money that is at the bottom of your purse, like little bits of change, or little bits here and there, and squirreling them away somewhere, like literally sometimes in a coffee can at work or something like that. So that could be sort of the first obstacle, is the financial aspect. Another obstacle can be the relationship aspect and the social aspect. People who are abused are often isolated from their friends. You'll talk, and this happens to men and women, right? You'll talk to people who it's like they're 5 years in a relationship, and it's like, how many friends do you have, instead of, the other party has? And if the answer is 0, that can be concerning, right? If you're not allowed any friends that aren't the partner's friends, that can be a warning sign. And this is often the first warning sign. If you start finding that your circle of friends is shrinking as your partner either says you can't talk to this person, or, or sometimes they'll say you can't talk to this person. Sometimes they will do things to actively drive your friends away. If you start seeing that may be the first sign, like the very first thing. Do you have any sort of thoughts on that one, or?
I think it's broader. If you start seeing the power dynamic shift in any facet of your life, whether it's social, economic, relationship wise, I mean, this case, I'm struggling with whether to actually do a deeper dive on what you heard, because a lot of people are in similar positions in various facets of this, because there's a power dynamic that exists, and there's a social power dynamic in access to friends and access to influence. That has its currency. There is currency there. When you have the ability to influence those around you to basically control a narrative, that has currency. Then there's access to finances, and financial currency itself is currency. There's power that exists in every single dynamic. And when you start to see one of those powers shift in too much of the extreme, or when it becomes something that pulls you in your marriage outside of your comfort zone, that is when you need, that's the red flag you can't ignore. When you guys go into a marriage and you have an agreement about how you're going to operate as a married couple, that agreement needs to be flushed out pretty solidly. And people exchange power back and forth in a marriage. It happens all the time. But when you start to see that there is a gross shift in one aspect of power, whether that power is influence, whether that power is decision-making, whether that power is financial, when that starts to hurt, or when you can see that being used as a tool against you, that is when you need to actually start taking this far more seriously. And I'm not saying get out immediately. Take it more seriously.
Yeah. Consider what's happening in the direction, and whether or not that's something you like, and whether or not that's something that you're able to deal with, and be aware of it. Sometimes there needs to be a consideration as to what's going on. And I see people saying that they want to hear Amouranth's husband's side first. We don't know at this stage. We've heard one snapshot moment, right? and we can't say what's happened or not happened. And like one of the things that I'll discuss here is that sometimes false claims, and I'm not saying that's necessarily what's happening here. This is just, we got to have academic discussions here. Sometimes false claims are also used as a weapon of abuse. And that can be particularly tragic because, you might have somebody who's been completely isolated from all of their friends. And then also they feel like the justice system is against them. And that can be a very difficult thing. One other thing I will say is if you have a friend that you haven't talked to in 10 years because they got driven out by your now you realize abusive relationship, more of those people than you think will be happy to hear from you again. And you may have more resources than you think. That friend from high school might actually be the person who steps up. One thing that's become really clear to me over the years is that it's very hard to predict who will stand up for you in a difficult situation, because sometimes somebody you think will be your absolute closest friend will just completely drop the ball when you're in a difficult spot. And sometimes people who you think are just like a casual friend who you never really talk to. I had a woman who needed to get out of an abusive relationship, and she ended up staying with a woman from work who didn't like her. Like, they fought all the time at work. But when this woman heard that she was in trouble, just sort of through the rumor mill, was like, I got a spare room. Come stay. Like, you just never know who's going to step up and who's going to just not. So reach out to those people. You can't predict until you talk to them what they're going to do. So it's worth trying. So that's sort of, another sort of thing on resources there. We sort of talked a bit about the financial, we've talked a bit about the social, other sort of means of control here can be, people start thinking they're worthless. And, again, this happens to both genders, where they get sort of convinced that nobody will love them, nobody will like them at all, and that they're sort of contemptible, but only this one person will put up with them, but only so far, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that one's tough too, right? That's difficult. And I guess we should talk about the sex work dimensions on this.
The only reason the only reason that there's even a basis of talking about it is the fact that so many people can't get beyond it. This is part of this that drives me freaking crazy. There's people that do the sex work. They accuse the sex worker, because it was sex work, that somehow these people are deserving of this. Regardless of where you look at this, from where you look at this, and Ian, if I am overstepping, I am on your channel. You can please cut me off. Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Both of these two decided that this was okay for their marriage, at least at one point in time. That's very clear dynamic. To say that one person deserves abuse from their significant other, I don't care in which direction, has nothing to do with that. It's that if that is how you feel, maybe I'm going to hold back on that.
I mean, here's the thing. There was a lot of people who have made comments, and I'm just going to address the sort of internet comments, basically saying, oh, well, she was doing this. It's a grift, that she was, pretending to be single, and that, they were entirely happy with taking people's money. Well, first thing, guys, sex workers are like your retail workers, which is they will lie to you. If you ask the retail worker what kind of day they're having, they will tell you that they're feeling, oh, I'm having a great day, because they're told that's what they need to do. If they say, hey, you know what, I hate working here, and I also hate you, Mr. Customer, they are going to get potentially fired. You know, the the stripper, when she tells you that she likes you, it is probably to get money. Like, that is part of things, and this, you should understand that if you are, engaging with sex work, which includes her hot tub streams. It includes all of this stuff. The sex worker doesn't owe you honesty about their name, about their relationship status, about any of that stuff. Like, and if you're giving money to them based on the notion that you are going to sleep with them, that's on you. That's not on, like, I'm sorry, guys of the world, Amouranth is not lining up to sleep with you. It's just not going to happen for you. And so if you've been giving her money on the hopes of that, it's not happening. Lots of people have been blaming her for that, and there really has come into question whether or not this sex work is consensual.
That's a different story from people just accusing like the sex work as being a bad thing. Like there are
Yeah,
two sides to that. And Ian, thank you for like highlighting that there are two different sides of that equation. One are the people that are going after her because it's like, you do this, therefore this is you are deserving of this. And I've seen those trolls, and those are the people I'm saying GTFO. Like,
yeah,
no. As far as the power dynamic is concerned, that's a different story. And what we saw was a and even if you watch the full thing, which I've watched twice, hour and 40 minutes, watched it twice all the way through. Even watching that is one conversation in a marriage of 7 years. And we don't know. And you can, and I'm all for taking every person's word for it. Hers, absolutely. If she felt compelled to do it, yeah, that's not okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's really, really difficult here, and you get situations. I mean, let's sort of be realistic about sex work. Is that it is a mass? It's a huge category. It includes things like hot tub streams, which is sort of non-contact sex work. It includes people who are phone sex operators. It includes people who are on OnlyFans. It includes people who are doing survival level prostitution on the streets. It includes people who are making thousands or millions of dollars, doing all, escorting work or whatever. There is a range of agency that is involved in it, because some people are in situations of what you could call high agency. I do this because I choose to, and they might like the work, or they might just like the money. And you get people who are in low agency, like, I do this because I am physically compelled to by a human trafficker. It's a very difficult category, but one thing you see is one form of abuse that comes up is forced sex work. And forced sex work is a problem. But you also see people who are afraid of what they can do in a relationship and how the courts will treat them based on them doing sex work. And that can also be sort of a trap here. And I
Here's
see,
the part. I mean, yeah, here's the part that sucks for someone like me that's looking at this. And this is part of the thing that, like, do I look uncomfortable? Yes, I am uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable because I've seen more of this than you guys would like to know about. I've seen dynamics that existed where the two of them engaged in a relationship with a third party, completely consensual, all of the above. Then all of a sudden, one rule was broken, and the entire thing turned into a back and forth dynamic where one person was then saying they were forced into it from the beginning. Have I seen the dynamic where two people were enthralled by the prospect of something fun that they wanted to engage in? The second it happens the first time, all of a sudden they regret it. And then the other person is so enamored with it that they really enjoyed it that the other spouse is thinking they're being supportive and they keep going along with it. And then all of a sudden things blow up 2 years later. I've seen that too. Have I seen situations where 3 people moved into a house together and raised a child that was born of one of those marriages until all of a sudden one person left for the other spouse? Yeah. I've seen all of these different things play out. And the problem that I'm having with the internet right now is the internet is jumping to judgment on what happened in this specific situation without any knowledge that all of this other stuff does in reality exist. We just don't like to talk about it. No one likes to talk about the fact that these things happen on a regular basis in different ways. And jumping to judgment on a case like this is exceedingly dangerous. I hate doing it. You're right. What he said, horrible. Absolutely. That is verbal abuse, right? 101, period. But we don't know what happened in the 7 years of their marriage.
Yep. And I mean, I feel like people who are on, who are in these sorts of parasocial relationships with like a Twitch streamer like that, I feel like you either are self-deluding or you have to know that you're partially buying a fantasy. Like, people are sort of blaming that, this whole sort of aspect there. And I'm just like, no, this is, it's not fair. And it is part of what, keeps people in these, circumstances. I'm sure has made enough money to retire. And it sounds like she might want to from some of the comments that she's making in that video. Right. And who could blame her? Like if I made $2 million a month for an entire year, I would retire from lots of things and I would just do pro bono law just because somebody's got to. That's sort of the thing. And I see somebody saying, unless he controls all the money, that's again why you need somebody to rescue the money.
Yeah, that's a legal fiction. That's something that you can feel practically, like you can feel that practically, but on a legal notion, this is why you need to talk to an attorney. Imagine that you're in that dynamic and having talked to an attorney that you have more power than you do. Like how much power does that give you in that situation? And then with all the threats that people are making, if you know that you have leverage, legal leverage, how much do those threats land home? I mean, how much does that give you as far as strength to leave a situation that is otherwise toxic? Talk to an attorney, please. More than once. I don't care.
Yeah, that's the other value of a lawyer is that the lawyer they're not your counselor, they're not your therapist, but they are in your corner. And it can feel incredibly powerful to have that person behind you and to be able to say like, he's changed the 2-factor authentication on all the counts. We'll fix that.
No problem.
No problem. We'll get this into court. We'll get a court order and that bank will freeze those accounts or we'll get this sorted out. Like this is one of the things courts deal with all the time is, hey, we need to, get the money out of one person's hands and into both people's hands. And I see, how do you talk to a lawyer if you have no access to the money? We went over that. There's strategies to either sort of squirrel money away or talk to the lawyer and tell them that there is money, but you have no access to it. Because there are lawyers out there.
The legal aid, there are different resources. There's U.S. legal aid in every single state. Contact the bar association for the county where you live. That bar association will more than likely have a referral service, which will have programs that will refer you to attorneys that take cases free of charge. I am one of them in my county. When a case comes to me, no charge for a consult when it's the right criteria. So talk to various people. There are access to attorneys prior without spending a single dollar. It's possible.
Yeah. So this is, and I guess the sort of next thing to talk about is the risk of violence aspect, because violence is a risk, and some of these abusive relationships are already violent. and some of them can become violent in the course of the changing power dynamic. When somebody leaves, that power dynamic that's been talked about, and like one party can be really comfortable with how the power has been because they've enjoyed all of it, right? And they may suddenly feel like they're in a free fall if they're losing that power. And so what do they do to regain it? Sometimes violence.
That's the shock and awe thing I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
The power to leave is a power that you have that they try to make you feel like you don't have. And when you actually start exerting that power, they see a shift in the power dynamic and they try to exert power of their own. So when you are in that situation, that's why it's even more important to talk to an attorney to know what your rights are in your given state. For example, in Virginia, single party consent state for recording. I have clients that are in touchy situations in Virginia, and I tell them that audio recording in this state, you can audio record single party consent if you have that thing in your pocket. And I want you to have it all the time. You change the number, you put a speed dial on your phone, you change settings on your watch to automatically call 911 if you're in a fall. You do things to protect yourself even prior to that first explosion, please.
Yeah. Check absolutely on the recording laws in your jurisdiction, because some places, so we just sort of dropped into the legal language.
Yeah, sorry.
One party recording. Oh, I mean, I do it all the time. One party recording states basically means that one person who can hear the conversation has to be aware that it's being recorded. So a no party situation would be like, I set my phone to record and I leave it in the living room, and then I go out shopping, and then I have a recording of all of these conversations that nobody was aware I was recording. That in almost every place is illegal. I say almost every because there's potential exceptions. A lot of places are what they call one party, which means that if I'm talking to Rob, I can record that and I don't need to tell him. Now, he's aware right now that we're recording because he agreed to come on a live stream and, is aware of that. But this means that you can, like, for instance, record your phone calls and so forth. Two-party recording means that both people need to be aware. And in some circumstances, that can be very difficult. There are some places that have two-party recording with exceptions for criminal activity, but not all of them. So
and when Runkle's saying two-party consent, they both have to be aware. That can be as simple as if you guys have ever called in and they give you that disclosure of this is on a recorded line, your desire to keep speaking, that is your acknowledged consent that you're being recorded. In most jurisdictions that are two-party consent states, once you announce I am recording, their behavior of continuing to speak is their acknowledgement of that consent. So talk to an attorney in your jurisdiction.
Yeah, talk to somebody who is aware, but you can have, sometimes you can have situations of just start a recording, and like the first thing, if you are in one of these places where that is sufficient, the first thing on that would be a shout of, I am recording. And then that's on the record and is covered. But again, you need to check with your local jurisdiction. And where this can become especially complicated is if you start having conversations that cross boundaries. Because let's say somebody in California phones me. California thinks that it's a two-party state, and Edmonton thinks it's one party. So now it becomes an issue as to this. The other thing to be aware of is that often those things apply to recording. And so there can be a workaround, which is phoning a friend, because your friend is not a recording device. Usually your friend is just a person, but they can testify as to what they heard.
Also, give like a quasi caveat to all of these things.
Yeah.
What Ian and I are talking about is normal discussions where something is happening and you're afraid that something might go down that route. And these are actions that you might take to prevent that from occurring at some point in time during a discussion. If something starts happening, or if you're in a situation that in that moment is dangerous, I am ethically prohibited from telling you to go ahead and violate the law, but the choice is ultimately yours. And you can weigh that balancing choice of, am I going to get busted for recording something unlawfully, or is this possibility going to happen to me? Now, I can't tell you that you should choose one of those or the other, but hopefully you are aware that your safety is first and foremost the most important thing to do ever.
Well, the other thing I was going to note is that in just about every jurisdiction that I'm aware of, 911 records.
Yep.
And so I have dealt with lots of files where there's a phone call that somebody made from inside a pocket to 911. The other thing I will add as a caution is that once the police are involved, you don't have the option to get them uninvolved. And this can sometimes impact people in situations where they might want to change their mind, which happens. I can't make people's decisions for them. People make those, things. But if you are being physically abused, having the police in is helpful. You can also get restraining orders and possibly bail conditions, but I will put a big old asterisk on that, because a restraining order and a bail order is a piece of paper. It's a big, fancy, important piece of paper, but it doesn't stop bullets, and it doesn't stop knives, and it doesn't stop somebody backing over you with their car. So if you get one of these orders, you still need to be very cognizant of your safety. And here in Canada, I can't advise, get a gun or anything like that. But if you're in an area that allows it, it can sometimes be useful. The other thing that can be useful is just not being where they expect you. Sometimes moving to a place they don't know where you are is fantastic. If they are available in your area, shelters can be useful. But if you're a male victim, male victims typically don't have access to shelters. And with women, the sad thing is that women get advised to go to the domestic violence shelter. Men get advised to go to the homeless shelter. And yeah, I see, TRO is great if the cops serve it.
And even so, it's still a piece of paper. Like, I hate to say it that way. It's an order. It's words. And Rick posted in the chat earlier, it's words on a piece of paper. Yeah, every attorney will tell you that. It's a remarkable tool. But the best tool is to put yourself in a situation where they can't hurt you, period.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
eat shoemaker.
Mr. Miyagi says the best defense is don't be there. Yep. People ask me, what is the best thing I've got for self-defense? And I'll show you my best self-defense weapon. Making these go fast.
Do you know how many people on stream were waiting for you to pull out some real weapon?
Oh, I know. And that's part of the fun, is you can pull out the correct thing there. But I have seen a file where the guy in this case broke into the house with basically a murder kit and was very upset because he found her to not be there. And I can tell you why she wasn't there. It's because I was going, this guy's freaking crazy. You need to find another place to stay. And it's like, but this is my house. I'm like, it is, but you also want to not be upset. So
and coordinate your departure. Plan ahead. The whole leaving on a whim is in some cases it's really important that you get out of there right at that moment. But by the time that situation devolves to that case, if you leave without actually having a little bit of a plan, sometimes it can create difficulties just for access to materials, documents, finances. Coordinate the departure and involve authorities if you need to. Police will happily, I don't say happily, I think they do it begrudgingly, but they are more happy doing that than being called to the domestic situation later. They will happily observe your departure from the home rather than be called when an incident has arisen.
Yeah. Police will say that one of the most dangerous scenes they get called to is domestic situations. So be aware that as the relationship disintegrates is where the risk of violence picks up, and it's often a situation where things get worse. Have a plan for that, and yeah, it can be difficult there. I see somebody saying they put Brian Landry up in a hotel room and said the women's shelter paid for men to stay in a hotel in those situations. Sometimes that happens. There are women's shelters that will do that. Don't expect that that's how your women's shelter operates in your town, because a lot of the time what they will do is hang up on you. It's a sad truth, but straight up. And in a couple of occasions, they may call the police on you because some shelters believe that it's always the man who is the abuser. And so I have seen situations where the shelter has called the police on somebody who was calling looking for a space for that. So be careful. Self-defense is something to consider about, all of these things. But the other thing is self-defense is something you want to make sure that you potentially have some training on that. And that might be something you get after after these things have sort of gone bad. But, if you're going to carry a firearm, please make sure you know how to use it. And know how to carry it, and know how to, know how to deal with that. Another thing I was going to get to is something that just came up in chat. So I'll bring up the comment here. Be careful with social media. Yep. And especially be careful of your friends' social media, because your helpful friends may leak information in ways that may harm you.
Inadvertently. Oftentimes inadvertently.
Yep. And keep in mind, stalkery abusers have nothing but time and put police detectives to shame sometimes. I have seen the level of research people do. And just to give an example, friend says, "Hey, I just met with so-and-so." And then 15 minutes later, posts a selfie of them getting ice cream. And their abuser somewhere is sitting there looking at a map, finds that ice cream store, and draws a 15-minute radius around it. And now he's got a circle to look for. Which, is... And I mean, this is terrifying, right? But this is the kind of thing that comes up. So be aware of that. I see Dr. Spoon is saying, good time to shell Branca's book, Law of Self-Defense, if you choose to defend yourself with a firearm. Yep, know what to do with it. I see Just Summers says, so glad no guns in Australia. Maybe. The thing is that sometimes abusers have been prevented from killing their victims by firearms.
Yeah, there's a trade-off there.
Statistically, more often men are the abusers, and are also statistically more often larger. And a lack of weapons benefits the larger party. So that's kind of the that's kind of the aspect there. I see question on the recording laws. If you call a friend, can they record the call? Maybe. Depends on the
don't
local
tell
law.
Them. Don't
check with a lawyer.
Yeah.
I see when victims leave, how can they and their advocates prevent the accused abuser from following through with threats, i.e. hurting or losing shared pets? Ideally, leave with the pets. More shelters now are trying to create shelter space for pets. And but I mean, there are no guarantees, right? There just aren't. So That's
Yeah, and
sort
the
of the
thing is,
scope.
what Ian and I are talking about, this is not limited to a male against female dynamic. This exists in the female to male dynamic more than you would imagine. Like, oh my gosh, the number of times. Whether it's
Yeah.
someone tracking somebody down and causing a confrontation that gets violent, whether it's behaviors in the home. I mean, this is not a one sex or the other sex thing. This is about a power dynamic, which if you have listened to it, we're talking about the person having power, not related to someone having uh, power as a male or a female. It goes both ways.
Yeah. The other thing is now more and more we can talk about electronic issues because a very large number of abusers do things like putting trackers on your phone and may, for instance, have your email set up to auto forward. So if you are in these situations, you may need to, for instance, set up an entirely new, depending on how stalkery your partner is, you may need to, for instance, set up an entirely new email address from a computer known to be clean. And what I
Yeah, I
mean
don't.
known to be
That's
clean is,
that's not a
you know,
may. That's not a may for me. Like every
yeah,
client, I tell them that's a you do. Like that's not a may. Same thing with bank accounts. I don't give them the may. It's not an option. You set up a clean account. You set up a clean email.
clean phone.
Clean phone if you can. Yeah, you clean everything.
At the very least, you're going to want to do a factory reset on your phone
Correct.
because there's all sorts of apps out there that can be used to track. Um, there's also all sorts of tracking devices out there. Apple AirTags have been used in a large number of these circumstances, and there's key loggers. There's all sorts of things. So you may want to talk to somebody who's got some digital experience because the amount of times that this stuff happens is, is an issue.
And
And,
how fast it changes. For example, Apple AirTags came out and Apple had to revise their terms of service and terms of use within, I think, about a month and a half because people learned that this was being used to track people and Apple hadn't caught up with it. So they had to then give an alert, which if your phone is in proximity to an Apple tag right now, you'll get an alert that will say, hey, do you recognize this Apple tag that's following you? That was an
if,
adjustment that was made after the fact.
if it's an Apple phone,
If it's an Apple phone, correct.
they don't.
Proprietary, proprietary.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of issues there. So you got to be sort of aware of all of these things and talk to your lawyer, because the other thing is, when somebody comes to me and I'm concerned about their phone, the first thing I want to do before I do a reset is to dump the phone and get a detail, like all the details on that. And I can tell you, I have had people who've been falsely accused when they were the actual victims of the abuse, who were saved on this based on a phone dump and being able to take that in to somebody who does forensics. And they're like, oh yeah, look at the trackers on this thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's,
Yeah.
Um,
Guys, there's a reason that Ian and I know the stuff about this. Like attorneys run into it more than you would ever imagine. Like the number of things that I have become knowledgeable of that are ridiculous to most people, the tracking software devices, how people use social media, the different efforts, things people will go through. Case knowledge, talk to an attorney. They're going to be smarter about this stuff than you think.
the thing is also the worst file you've ever encountered is always just the worst file you've encountered so far.
Yep.
And as much as there's things to look for the air tags, there's also trackers out there that don't report this stuff. And yeah. And I see somebody saying, have I ever seen a scenario where both parties were kind of psycho? All the time.
Mm-hmm.
Happens all the time. If you do have abusive text, never delete them. Yeah. And somebody's asking, what is an AirTag? An AirTag is a tracker that Apple put out that is basically designed to help you lose stuff that you might otherwise have
All the way around. Find stuff that you might otherwise have lost.
stuff that you might otherwise have lost. Yeah. And but they have been used for bad purposes by people. And your lawyer can possibly talk to a private eye or something like that, or a mechanic to go through things. So explain phone forensics a bit more. That's tough. Basically, there are people who will go through and look through all of the data on a phone to determine things that are useful for court proceedings. This is a very difficult job. So that I feel for the people who do it, because a lot of the stuff that they deal with involves bad pictures of children. But they can also be doing things that, to help people in situations like this. I see Roy Handy saying I wasn't allowed to have a cell phone. Thankfully, nowadays you can get a pay-as-you-go, burner phone. And I can tell you, as a lawyer, I have sometimes had to provide clients with phones just to ensure that they could, to deal with things. And somebody was asking me about Bill C-21 and what I think of the Bill C-21's domestic violence provisions. I don't think they're great for a whole lot of reasons, but that's really sort of outside the scope of this. I've got a bunch of videos talking about Bill C-21, so we'll talk about that sort of on another occasion. The thing is that most domestic violence circumstances aren't as bad as all this. We're talking in a lot of ways about the worst case scenario. But domestic violence tends to sort of go into a diverging pattern. And diverging pattern, by that I mean you get situations where there's like one instance of abuse that then resolves itself. People work out better ways to argue. Or it becomes endemic and becomes sort of a repeating thing. And so people will sometimes say, get out on the first occasion. I can't necessarily say that that's true. But I can say, if you are falling into this pattern of controlling behavior, get out. And the get out, that applies to both people. There is this weird thing where abuse can sometimes be localized to a relationship. You can have two people who are bad for each other. That happens. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is you can also have people who are bad for anybody. And people don't necessarily know which they are. But if you are finding yourself in a situation where you are getting controlling in the relationship, get out. It doesn't end well. It ends with you in jail. So the advice to get out applies on both sides of things. It applies to, it applies to the abuser as well. Get out. It's for your good and for their good. And I know it sounds kind of horrible to be saying here is advice to, abusers, but I think it's solid. And I see a person who threatens to kill pets is good for no one. Quite possibly. There's certain mental health issues.
Yeah, people threaten a lot of things, none of which are bad. I would say that is in the category of that, but that category is more expansive than you would like to admit, or that you would know about. I mean, like I said, this is one conversation. The only thing that I'm comfortable saying about this particular conversation is that this relationship should have never gotten to the point where that conversation was had. Like whether one of them left it, the other one left it. Yeah.
And I mean, it's difficult, right? It's these are complicated and challenging sort of topics. And yeah, we can talk about sort of certain mental health issues that cause some, or that can promote this. Narcissistic personality disorder shows up a lot. And that isn't to say that all people with any particular mental health issue will have, abusive behaviors or the like. Because that's not how it works. But some people with these issues can be particularly terrible, narcissistic, borderline, psychopathy slash,
Most personality disorders.
yeah. And
They have attributes that can tend to this type of behavior. Not
Yeah.
that they do, they can tend to that type of behavior.
And I see, am I going to read all super chats? I absolutely will, because there's a lot of good questions in them.
We should start
a matter
circling
of,
to those questions as soon as you wrap up, like
yeah.
where we are.
So let's look at some super chats here, because we're like 40 behind. Having a good lawyer. So Bop It, thank you. Having a good lawyer with good morals was super important when I got divorced. He made sure that things went smoothly. Yes. And a good lawyer is one who is trying to make sure things go smoothly, as opposed to one who's trying to stir up conflict for, often for their own purposes, unfortunately. Stephanie Coker, thank you very much. How does spouse get guns out of the house when abuser has threatened suicide, but then says they're fine when police came to check? Spouse feels unsafe. This is a very difficult situation there. And if you've got an abusive relationship with suicide threats, that is what I would consider a high-risk situation. Because suicidal abusers are also like that combination of suicidal plus abusive can end up being homicidal as well.
Check your local jurisdiction for red flag laws. Different jurisdictions have them. Check your jurisdiction for what qualifies for a red flag detention, which is where they go in and actually remove the guns from the house. Every state's different, but.
And I will say, be careful about, don't use this as a strategy in a relationship.
Correct.
Don't use any of these laws as strategies in a relationship, because you will absolutely get savaged by the courts in most jurisdictions if they think that you have used this in fashion.
They're shields, not swords.
Yeah. I see the hard disagree on all personality disorders. Some make you more at risk to be abused than be abuser. Yes. It's basically, without getting too much into personality disorders, like the avoidant anxious sort of personality disorders tend to be more victimized than victimizer. But yeah, we're not going to delve into things too much here. But yeah, suicide risk is a problem there. And yeah. Emily Stein, thank you very much for the super chat there. No message, but thank you. Tabitha Westbrook noted abusers also use litigation abuse to continue to harm the victim. There are absolutely people who will use the court process as a weapon. And I wish I could say that the court system doesn't do that, but it does. And yeah, that's not ideal. So, yeah. Alex Lopez, plug domestic abuse hotline. Super chat will not. Yes, you're going to have to look up in your area domestic abuse hotlines. And one thing I will also say is that if you are in a situation where you are having to use computers that are potentially compromised, then you may want to do this from other scenarios or from a different computer. So one thing that can be really fantastic about this is libraries, because libraries will typically have computer access, and often there's a library that's near a shopping center. In just about every circumstance I've dealt with abusive partners, they will let their partner go shopping because they're like, hey, yes, you should get the groceries. And so that typically allows for a situation where you can diverge just a little bit in order to say, hey, I'm going to look up these hotlines and make some calls from a clean computer. And also, I see your librarians also have lots of information. Yes, often librarians are a great resource on that. So libraries are kind of a secret weapon on all of this. So yeah. And I see National DV text message hotline, start to 88788. I can't confirm that one. I don't know that one. But yeah. And I note, and library computers restrict what can and cannot be installed onto their computers. Often
Correct.
libraries go a step further. Often the libraries are using virtual machines such that each time somebody logs out, it basically destroys the previous incarnation and restarts with a fresh install. So library machines can be fantastic for that. Also schools, and I don't mean like elementary schools or high schools. I mean like universities are another place where you will find libraries that will let you use computers. Courthouses. However, going into a courthouse is usually, let's just say if you're concerned that your phone is being tracked, do not take it to a courthouse, because that will set off all sorts of alarm bells and may escalate things that in ways that you don't expect. So be aware that going to a courthouse, if you're being physically tracked, can be something that sets things to a difficult place. Libra Librarian, thank you for the super chat. And I guess we were just sort of extolling the praise of librarians. So thank you very much. 9-inch nail gals, more money to the Become Pro Bono. Well, thank you very much. I love how huge your heart is. It is incredible that you are looking for ways to help others as much as possible. That's why I got into law. Ultimately, it's just that it allows for good lawyers can do a lot of helping people out, and unfortunately, bad lawyers can do the opposite. But Lynn, if review's bad, check work history / results of attorney. We had an attorney, I'm guess, or have, who is truly bad. Their work history proves it. Fired, misrepresentation to client and judge, etc. Here in Canada, we've got Canly, and Canly makes it really easy to check a lot of things. You can plug the lawyer's name in and see, if the courts have given them a lot of rulings that are. The thing is every lawyer loses. Every lawyer loses. But read the cases to see what the commentary is about the lawyer, because sometimes you'll find rulings that where the judge has comments about the lawyer's behavior. Look for those ones. Those can tell you stuff. Also look up disciplinary records. Mm-hmm. Because if you see somebody has, like if you look up my disciplinary history, it has no entries. But if you see somebody who's got like a dozen entries for like misrepresentations to the court, misrepresentations to clients, failing to assist their clients, that kind of thing, then you might want to go, maybe not. Midnight Drury, sorry, can't give more, but thanks for the good work you do. Well, no need to apologize. One of the things I always say is if you're in a financial situation where you can't give a super chat, then don't. I don't want anybody struggling to, to sort of afford to anything. So Kelly's Corner, rich lawyers treated it like a business, not a service to those who need them. Lawyers like you and like you, Rob and Ian, are the latter kind of lawyers. Yeah, it's difficult there. So, and we're going to have to wrap up here fairly quickly, folks. So I'm just going to go through super chats. I don't know, Rob, I'll go through super chats. I don't know if you are able to stay for all of that, but we'll try to sort of deal with.
I'll stay as long as I can. I got about 10 more minutes. I can stay on.
Awesome. So Talia E, ethics over economics, pro bono is such an inspiring goal. Well, thank you. I think there's lots of lawyers out there who that's what they'd really like to do. Caradon, thank you very much for the super sticker. Kathy in Virginia, I divorced in 1994. Still grateful for my attorney. A pit bull with lipstick. Had recurring nightmares about my ex for 12 years after the marriage ended. That's another thing, is that a good therapist can be fantastic. And especially if you have kids, keep in mind that your kids are also going to be affected. And maybe affected more than they look. Kids are resilient, but also fragile. And often that resilience can hide the fragility, such that a kid can look like they're doing just fine and be suffering.
And they see everything. Doesn't matter
And
how hard you think you hide it.
Yeah. You guys go into the other room to have your fight. You come out and you're feeling sobbing. The kid reads that. The kid is smarter than you think they are, which can be unfortunate. 9-inch nails, 9-inch nails gal. Thank you very much, puppy treat, for all those happy noises. Yeah, we got happy puppies. Stephanie Coker, thank you very much. Any legal rights for wife whose husband has unauthorized spicy time vids of her on one of his devices? She's afraid of what he could do if she files for divorce. Is there such a thing as a cyber restraining order? He has control of everything.
Yep. Talk to an attorney in your jurisdiction. I have done it before, where you coordinate a temporary motion that's filed either ex parte based on a temporary injunction, or you coordinate with the local magistrate for a basically revenge porn laws. You coordinate your divorce filing or domestic filing along with a criminal complaint for that. And basically you get injunctive relief and pretty harsh punishments if they violate it.
And in Canada, we have similar laws, and there have been situations, for instance, where the police will go through and seize somebody's devices to prevent that kind of release. So talk to your family lawyer, because they can probably help with that sort of thing. And also sometimes the recording of the unauthorized things, even within a relationship, can itself be a crime. So yeah. Trufflehound, thank you very much. I effing hate this. Massive respect to you both for the work you do. Building is way more simple. Contracts, insurance, WHS, that's my world. Huge respect, guys. Yeah, I mean, family law and criminal law, you deal with some really heavy shit sometimes.
Yeah.
Catherine Clark, this is great advice, but not legal advice. Yes, if you are in these situations, we've said it probably 100 times. We're going to keep saying it. Talk to a lawyer in your area, because they know your area. They know the laws there. And even there can be different practices county to county, even in the States. Like, sometimes it just matters which judges sit in your area as to how they handle things. So Tabitha Westbrook, thank you very much. The more educated people are on the dynamics of abuse and the more people hold abusers accountable, the less likely it is it can continue unabated. Absolutely. I feel like knowledge is power. And so that's why I thought this was an important stream to do. And I'm really glad Rob agreed with me and wanted to come on this stream here, because quite frankly, I'm proud of what we've sort of done here. And I thank Rob tremendously. It's so.
Thank you for doing this, period.
Well, I was just like, we gotta. Plasmo Cat, that guy would have to have a hell of a story to make up for threatening his wife's dogs. He admitted that he meant it. Outside looking in, I know, but damn. Yeah, and I mean, we just have to be careful, because we don't know what's going on. But I will say, I did not like that.
Nope.
And, as a guy with dogs, I love those dogs. Yeah. I would never threaten the dogs. So Mike Quaglia, thank you very much, gentlemen. I'm learning very valuable lessons and speaking carefully from both of you tonight. I mean, this is a topic where you gotta tread carefully, because lots of people who are potentially going to be hurt, but where we have to sort of handle things as we can. Jennifer Edwards, thank you, Ian. Thank you both for treating sex workers as real people deserving of respect. Absolutely. It's really easy for people to throw around things to say that, they're, disrespect. Sorry. I mean, everybody does things, and nobody is clothed in innocence. And, it's it's a harder job than the one I have. So like it's work, and it's often harder work than what I do. So yeah. Lindsay Metcalf, thank you for the very generous super chat. That's incredibly generous. Thank you. Thank you both for creating a space to have these hard conversations and modeling that we can talk about difficult issues in an informative and respectful manner. Well, thank you. That's sort of what we're trying to do here, and I think it's important. So Kathy and Virginia, thank you for this thoughtful and sensitive, informed educational discussion. You are both amazing and wonderful people. Well, thank you very much. Jefferson C. Post, I find my frustration with much of the discourse getting lost in snap judgments, blaming, shaming, and memeing. That it misses much of the main question of how do we make the abuse stop? Yeah, I think there's a lot of people out there who just want to get a hot take in, and
Yeah.
we're trying to avoid the hot takes. Like, you can see how we're sort of stepping around the what happened, because yeah, we just don't know at this stage, but we want to have real discussions. Ending our silence. Thanks for covering this. Finding yourself in a controlling situation doesn't happen overnight. Some people are abusers, some are ambers. If you're in an abusive relationship, get advice and make arrangements quietly.
Caution.
Often there is a real sort of tightening of the noose over time. And I mean, the whole sort of frog boiling situation is a good metaphor here. People, by the time they realize that they need out, are often in a situation where it's been made very difficult to get out, and that there's a lot of entanglements. There's, so that can be
That's
very
why, yeah, that's why I go back to that first thing I said. And for those that weren't listening or weren't watching at that time, basically, be aware of the power dynamics in the relationship in all different categories of that relationship. And when they start shifting in a way that makes you uncomfortable, that's a red flag that you shouldn't ignore.
Yeah. So, yeah. TRO is great if the cops serve it. Yeah. Sometimes the police don't clothe themselves in honor on these things. I will say that. Is there liability if one partner threatens self-harm and then follows through if the other partner leaves? Almost never. I'm not familiar with any jurisdiction that will impose liability in that, but
it depends. That's a very, very fact-specific inquiry, because there are cases where there's the very, very, very rare, like 0.01% case where the spouse is, and you've seen it in the news where the spouse is saying, go ahead and do this, do this, do this, do this, and sets up everything and then leaves. Like that's a different situation than this. Like,
Yeah.
But generally speaking, the 99.9, if they're saying that they're going to do something and you leave, you are in control of yourself. That is it.
Yeah. And if somebody is using that threat of self-harm as a weapon, then ultimately, you've still got to break out of that control. And sometimes that may mean calling in mental health professionals, which can have heavy impacts, but people shouldn't threaten that if they don't mean it, because you have to take that seriously, even if you don't have any liability on it, if that makes sense. What about security cameras inside the house, like light baubles? Would it need two sides consent? Only one part putting it? Putting security cameras inside the house can be extremely legally problematic because they film even when you're not home. And so there are situations where some people can get charged for that, especially hidden cameras in bedrooms and bathrooms.
That was the one thing that I was going to say, that almost every jurisdiction, that's a no.
Yeah.
But on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis, talk to an attorney about it. I do know families that have, I know families just with contentious environment inside the household where in common areas, there is a security camera and
Yep.
That's in the common areas. Talk to an attorney about what's lawful in your state.
Yeah. Just, again, really be careful about the bedrooms and bathrooms, because that gets to be sort of a big deal there. What if you leave and there are kids involved? I'm late if I missed that answer. Absolutely talk to a family lawyer if there are kids involved.
Yes.
Because you need to take steps to protect the kids, but you also need to take steps to protect yourself. And it can be very problematic. This one also tends to hit guys especially hard because of the lack of shelter space. Because if you've got a 6-year-old, you can't take them to a homeless shelter. And so that's unfortunate. Well, I think I read this one before, but good time to shell Bronca's book, Law of Self-Defense, if you choose to defend yourself with a firearm. Yep. Elbon, when victims leave, how can they and their advocates prevent the accused abuser from following through with threats, hurting, or losing shared pets? Ideally, you've got the pets with you, but and don't ever harm a pet as part of this. Like, to the extent that I have seen people get court orders to have a pet put down when it was sick, because they wanted to take it to a court in order to have have that heard, rather than just, I unilaterally put this pet down. Because look at how that looks to a court, because there's going to be disputes over that. So I also see make sure the cameras back up automatically and often. My friend's ex walked up and erased the videos. Yeah, if you're relying on digital evidence, the rule I give people is that if it's not in 2 places, it's not in anywhere. It is almost always the case that, or if you've only got it on your phone, the chances are that phone ends up into the toilet is high. But also in domestic things, phones get smashed all the time. It is one of the things that abusers do is they take a phone and they smash it. So if you do record a video, put it online. And I don't mean put it online everywhere. I mean, somewhere that you have
store it. Save it where you can re-access it.
StreamYard will let you record a video that is stored on StreamYard where you have access to it. You don't have to, you can do this sort of stuff where you're streaming live, like we're doing StreamYard right now, but it can also record on there. So like if I was dealing with a police interaction where I wanted to make sure that I was, safe in that, I'd be doing it on StreamYard. So, yeah. Good book for protecting oneself in general is The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker. I haven't read it, I'm afraid. Hans Jocher was asking, are you happy with Bill C-21's provisions with domestic violence? That is a longer topic for a video in and of itself. As I mentioned before, I actually think it could provide some real tools to abusers. And so that's why I'm very cautious about this one. Partly Sunny, thank you for this heavy topic. Knowledge is power. Thank you. Kathy and Virginia Hoglaw, thank you for participating in this discussion. I respect you and appreciate you sharing your knowledge and point of view. Hogue was in the chat offering a lot of really good comments.
Correct. So, yeah, I saw him there.
And I see Just Summer saying, I've had 3 phones smashed. Absolutely. So it is absolutely a thing there. GPS trackers are a thing. Some PDs know how to sweep for them. Thank you, Ryan432. Also for vehicle stuff, talk to a mechanic and ask if they have experience with it. Because there are places that these things can be hidden. But typically, this means going through and doing sort of a detailed audit of the power system. Because typically the trackers that are installed in vehicles will be installed in either easy places, like, under the undercarriage or in the wheel well, or they get installed right onto the power system so that they don't need to be recharged. And so a mechanic who has experience looking for these things will know the sort of usual places. Trufflehound, thank you very much to the Aussies in the chat. If you're being harassed, stalked electronically, socials, texts, etc., the use of carriage service to menace charge is a criminal charge, and police will assist you. Yeah, this is another reason why talking to to lawyers with some experience here is helpful, because they they'll look at this. And I think we're out of time with Rob. I'll go through the rest of the super chats, but I just wanted to say thank you again for joining me. This is a really important discussion, and I would only be able to do half of it, right? Because the family law aspect is so important.
Well, thank you for having me. I think it's important that we actually have the ability and a place to have these conversations that's mature and where we can kind of focus on giving facts in a sensitive and respectful manner. Thank you very much, Ian. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.
So,
well, and that's why I reached out to you. It's one of the things I know is your forte is sensible, responsible commentary. So you're not just an expert, but you're also a close friend and, somebody who I know I can rely on for nuanced and, the kind of commentary that I think this issue needs. So everybody check Rob out. His channel is Law and Lumber. And thank you once again for joining me.
Thanks, guys. Talk to you later.
All right. So I've got more super chats to go through. We're going to get through all of them here, folks, because, some people had very important things, and I don't want anybody to be missed here. Christy Graham, thank you for the very generous super chat. I'm broke, but here's $50. This may be the best LawTube stream ever done, and I can't thank you enough for doing it. Well, thank you very much. I think that this is the best thing that's been on my channel, without question. So, Lily's Art, thanks, Rob and Ian, for covering this very difficult topic and in a very tactful manner. Good job, you two. Thank you very much. I think that's Texas Carrie. Thank you for the super chat here. If you have children, even if they're teens, please find a good therapist to help them heal so they don't repeat what they know in their relationship. I will note that the repeating thing is not necessarily, some of that is myth and some of that is truth. People who are harmed can react in different ways. And so one of the ways people can react is by sort of lashing out at other people. And that can lead to abusive behaviors. But some people who have been the victims of abuse will go the other way and are very careful and very aware of those behaviors. So the reason why I put this caveat on this is that you should not assume that because somebody has been through a difficult childhood, that they are necessarily dangerous. There's a whole line of discussion that tends to assume that people who have been hurt are dangerous, and that can compound the hurt. So I want to put an asterisk on that, but I absolutely agree on make sure your kids get some help if you have the resource to do so, because your kids may be hurting and maybe hurting more deeply than it looks. And sometimes that hurt doesn't come out until they're older in life. Crazy Cat Queen, no matter how much you think an amicable divorce is possible, listen to your lawyer's advice. Shit can hit the fan after divorce. Once you start dating again, yes. Sometimes things explode later down the road, and you may not know what the triggers are for that. Misfits Mommy, I've always wondered if that pizza call to the police to ask for help really works. Yes, most dispatchers are sort of aware of that. And so you should, I'll just explain what this means. If you're in a situation where you can't necessarily talk to, the police, you can't necessarily call 911. Sometimes people have been able to get help by telling telling their partner, I'll order dinner, and then call 911 and say, hello, pizza, yes, we'd like a large pepperoni. And your 911 operator has probably been trained in this. And so they will probably say something like, is there someone there? And you can say, yes. And okay, is it safe to talk? No. And the other person doesn't know, like the person in the room doesn't know. And so you can be in a situation where, and I actually have heard a recording where the abusive person in the background said, are you talking to the pizza place? Put it on speaker. And so they said, okay, I'm putting on speaker, okay, I'll put it on speaker. and they put it on speaker, and the 911 operator actually went, okay, what sort of pizza was that again? And they're saying, oh, it's a large pizza, a large pepperoni pizza. And it's like, oh, okay, that'll be whatever, and we can get that to you in, however long. And I can tell you, it wasn't pizza that arrived. It was the cavalry. I can't promise that every 911 operator necessarily is going to be savvy, because and the other thing is that if you've heard of the pizza plate, the whole pizza call thing, the abusers have heard of it too. So that can happen as well. The other thing people can sometimes do is just dial 911 and then tuck the phone into a pocket. Everything's being recorded. The phone will probably still hear you. And if they can't get a response from you, but they hear shouting in the background, they'll start moving. This works better with a landline because they can trace a landline to a specific location, but they can triangulate with a phone. So, yeah. Kristen M96, thank you. That's all. Well, thank you. Joe Loy, thank you very much. Heart-shaped Isle, thank you as well. And Hans Jocher, I may be mispronouncing that. I hope I'm getting it right. Thank you very much. As someone who grew up in hell, please do not keep together for the kids. They don't deserve what you're putting them through. Yeah, sometimes people say, hey, I'm staying together for the kids. And the kids may not be thinking it's as great as all that. So, yeah. I also see some states have confidential address programs to keep you safe. That's another thing that your family lawyer can probably help you out with. And yes, I also see this one is just a thing in the chat. Thank you to all the mods. You really worked nonstop on some tough nut jobs tonight. I really want to thank the mods. Tough topic, and there were some people trying to troll or whatever else. I really appreciate the job you guys have done. That is fantastic. I can't say enough. Hans Jocher, what do you think of Bill C-21 and domestic abuse? I have done videos on that, but it's it'll be too long for this one. Emma Z, thank you for the membership here. Chris Mullen, thank you very much for the super sticker. Cindy T, thank you both for your insight and wisdom. Thank you. Chris Kirk, thank you guys. This is to support those that need help pro bono. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. KJ Weston became a YouTube member. Thank you very much. I always try to watch the chat as much as I can, and just sort of to not just look at super chats and so forth, but I just try to, sort of cover that as much. I see Ian and Rob as a mental health clinician of 30 years. I thank you for this. Respect. You should be proud. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I also see kind of ridiculous as to how much of this is conditional on jurisdiction. The reason why is because the law, like constitutional law, divides up powers between different kinds of government. And so, like, the federal government can't act in certain ways. That has to be state government or provincial government here in Canada. So all of this ends up being, sort of an issue. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month in the U.S. I did not know that, but I guess I have a good time. That felt kind of ugly saying. I'm going to just walk that back. KJ Weston became a YouTube member. Thank you very much. Just covered that one. Johnny Depp and Amber Heard showed that you need to hear all the evidence to come to a conclusion. Absolutely. And that's why I'm reluctant to jump to a conclusion, right? We, if you just read one text or just heard one recording, you might come to the wrong conclusion on something. You need to see sort of as a whole. Melissa S., thank you very much. I missed the beginning. You two are wonderful for this. I'll definitely have to rewatch from the beginning. Hopefully it won't be too triggering of my past. Thank you both for educating others on this. We did manage to avoid anything I thought was too triggering. So hopefully not too much, but I had trigger warning sort of videos ready. Actually, maybe I'll show those to you guys just so I can show you sort of what I've got here. 9 Inch Nail Scale, 1994. Hug a Unicorn Rob. I'm starting to lose my ability to talk. I've been at this for a while, but Claire Couchman, thank you very much. With how the video cuts off, what happens if he hurts her? Will Twitch be in trouble for not checking on her since it's their platform? I don't know that Twitch has any obligation, unfortunately. I will note that the cutting off is partially video editing, but yeah, it's tough. Most important message was to speak with a lawyer. Absolutely. I know not everyone has access to that, but it is important if you can. Mary Salvi, thank you very much for the super chat there. With your birds, thanks for the interesting discussion. Thank you very much. And Zeta Smith, thank you for the new membership. I'm going to show you guys the sort of warning videos I've got here, just so that you guys can tell me sort of what you think on this, if they're good or not. So I will start off with, here's the content warning video. So that's the sort of, here is, sort of potentially troublesome content. And then I've got a content warning end video. I don't know. Hopefully those are sort of, I hope people sort of don't find those to be too cutesy or whatever, but I sort of went with the cellophane notion, and I think that they work. Sometimes for trials of the century, we really need them, because if we're talking about stuff like, serious violence and so forth, but yeah. So that's kind of the those videos there. This is a really difficult topic, but I'm really glad that I got to talk about it. I'm really glad that you guys were here to join me for this. And I see Scott is asking, do I have one with dancing gnomes? I don't, but I can try to find one. Yeah. I see somebody talking about the shots that you can order at the bar. Different bars have different rules on this. So you may not necessarily, you may have to be careful about this. And the other thing is that sometimes abusive people are aware of what those shots are. So the other thing is, if you just tell the bartender, I am in trouble, bartenders will get on that. So yeah. And yeah. So there's different stories on all of that about people sort of calling for help. It's yeah. And I see in the IT world, we exercise the 3-2-1 backup rule. So I believe, Ian, you'll have to see if I'm getting this right, but I believe that's 3 backups in 2 separate locations, and I don't know what the further is, but yeah. And I see I was a bartender, can confirm I have ejected people. I can tell you, like, the whole thing about the shots things and so forth might be listed in the women's restroom, but the other thing is, if you just say, like, I have to get up to go to the bathroom, and you walk up to the bar and you say, I am in trouble, please help, that will work. The bartenders, they will have bouncers. So yeah. I see, is it possible to have an on-screen text that stays on the screen like a super chat through the content warning? I'll have to try to figure that out. So thank you. Scott Cardinal, excellent show. Very much appreciated. Absolutely. And guys, there's going to be Trials of the Century on Wednesday. I'm not going to be able to be there, but yeah. And I see, if I was a bartender, I would cut the music and say, it's my first day. How do I make this coded drink? Yeah, I mean, bartenders don't necessarily know that. So, yeah, you just got to be careful on all of that. So, bartenders, as a general rule, I mean, not every bartender is great, but as a general rule, bartenders and bouncers tend to want to be heroes. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that in the sense of bartenders and bouncers tend to actually have some very serious wish to help people if they can. And so, like, if you go and talk to the bartender, usually they're looking to help. The other thing is, bathrooms are a fantastic place. If you go up and I've seen this done in bars. I've seen it done successfully. If you've got a tube of lipstick, if you walk into a bar and you write, red dress table 2 help in big lipstick on the bar or on the bathroom window, that'll also get some attention potentially. So, because if you walk in, if you walked into a bathroom and you saw red dress table 2 help written in lipstick on the bathroom window, you'd try to get somebody's, attention on that. Yes. So, just saying, like, it's, there are ways to sort of get help there. And unfortunately, there's no sort of universal. And if there was a universal secret signal, that universal secret signal would become known to the abusive people sort of fairly quickly. The other thing I'll mention about bars is if you are at a bar and you suddenly start feeling woozy and the person you're with, especially if the guy you're with, starts trying to usher you into a cab, talk to the bouncer, talk to, help, ask for help, because there's also a risk of, drugging and so forth. And I see there, hide the lipstick or pen on your person versus purse, because your abuser will probably... Lipstick is something most women, or a lot of women, carry and doesn't tend to raise a lot of eyebrows. For those in Australia, when calling emergency services from a mobile, call 112 instead of 000. It will work from any phone, no matter your service. This is the other thing, is that 911 is not universal. In other countries, it might be a different, thing there. I saw a video where an abused woman slipped the receptionist at the vet office about her abusive boyfriend. So there's all sorts of ways to get a signal, and, writing something down on a piece of paper is a thing. And I see there, mine always took mine out, which is why I said it. And if you've got a partner who's doing things like not letting you go to the bathroom with your phone and taking your lipstick and a pen, away from you when you're going to the bathroom, that is, that's concerning, right? That is terrifying behavior. And, I don't really have a good solution to that necessarily. If you have to, write it in poop. I know that sounds horrible and somebody's going to have to clean that up, but, it's, all of this gets sort of ugly there. So I see, would a pinned comment work for a written version of cellophane? Yeah, we might have to do that. Although sometimes you want to bring up other comments. So I'll have to figure that out as to how to do it. I see literally anything to save your life is worth it. I will tell you, as much as you should not write in poop in bathrooms under a normal rule, because that is terrible behavior. If you had to do it because you were in a, situation of your partner is seriously abusive and you're worried about getting hurt, the bar will forgive you. Like, straight up. And I see write in blood if needed. Yeah. Whatever you'd have to do to save your life, save your life. So that is what it is. So, I see people saying I would try blood before poop. I mean, whatever you got, right? Like, just whatever. Go to the bathroom, but walk into the kitchen or back employee area. Yep. I can tell you the back employee area or the kitchen is going to be full of people who will potentially help you and have knives. Nope, they're not letting anyone in there. So, we could probably do a whole video on stuff about like how to, sort of get help there. I see the or simply don't exit the bathroom. I have seen abusers go into the women's bathroom. I have seen that happen. So, yeah, heavy topic, but I see the, I thought the music was not a huge trigger, though, just uncomfortable. Just saying triggers can be anything. Thank you for this chat. That's true. Yeah, I guess I'd have to think about that. And if I get more sort of people saying that they find the music like that, I guess it is kind of a duh, duh, duh. Yeah, I'll have to think on whether or not to change that up. All right, and all of those things I saw somebody saying, what about men? All of the things that I mentioned for women are likely to apply for men, but I will tell you that men may unfortunately get less sympathy. It's just a hard fact, but still try. And the more people become aware of the fact that men can be victims of this, I'm hoping things will change on that. All right, so I'm going to wrap this up here, but yeah, thank you guys for joining me. I really think that this is sort of an important topic, and yeah, so one last one here. We've got Hugsy, and thank you, and Rob. Thank you very much as well. So that's it for now. See you guys next time.